You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
This is Salt and Spine.
And you also find that there is no Italian cuisine per se, but there are regional cuisines throughout the peninsula, and it's part of what makes Italy such a interesting place to live in and to explore and to try to grasp it, a deeper understanding of it and its people.
Hi there, I'm Brian Hogan Stewart, and you're listening to Salt and Spine Stories on Cookbooks. And this week, we're in the hills of Chianti with John Bersani, author of 20 Amici, 40 Ricette, 20 Friends, 40 Recipes. John hosted us for this conversation in his lovely home in Gaiole in Chianti, where he welcomed us like family. With a lifelong passion for hospitality, John has spent years bringing people together around the table, splitting his time between the United States and this part of Italy. In 20 Amici, 40 Ricette, he captures that spirit beautifully. Each chapter pairs a recipe or two with one of 20 friends who have shaped his life in this region, from simple pastas to celebratory feasts that stretch late into the night. The result is both a cookbook and a portrait of friendship, community, and the Italian art of living well. We have a great conversation today with John about Italian cuisine, life in Tuscany, and his new book. Of course, we're also putting John to the test with our signature culinary game. And as always, you can find more, including featured recipes from 20 Amici, 40 Ricette at saltandspine.com. So let's head now to Gaiole in Chianti, where John Bersani joined us to talk cookbooks. Well, happy to be here in your home in Gaiole in Chianti. Thank you, John. Welcome to Salt and Spine. We're so thrilled to have you.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for making the trip to Chianti today.
Of course. It's a beautiful day, and we're here to talk about your cookbook, your first cookbook, right? Unless I missed something. You haven't written another cookbook.
No, this is my first one.
Well, congratulations. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And your book is really a testament to food and community. And we always like to learn a little bit more about you and sort of how you got to the place you are today before we dive into the specifics about the book. And certainly anybody who's looked at your book can see your Italian-American roots are sort of a big part of the story that led you to here. And you talk about growing up and that you lived in sort of a quintessential Wonder Years suburban neighborhood is how you describe it,
yes.
and Syracuse. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship to food that you had from an early age, and if there's specific memories from the kitchen or things that really sort of ignited your passion for Italian food?
It sounds cliche, and I'm a guy. I don't usually love cliche, but I did grow up in that quintessential Italian American family. My grandparents on both sides came from Italy. My dad's family is from the Lazio region,
okay.
From a small hill town called Sonnino, about 2.5 hours south of Rome. And my mother's family is from the other coast, Italy's smallest region, Molise.
Okay.
And, many Italians in the 1920s and early 30s left these regions because of poverty, looking for a better life. My grandparents were no exception to that. And many of them from those specific provinces ended up in Syracuse, New York.
Sure.
There was a large Italian enclave there known as the North Side. And I think in both instances, on both sides of my family, they already had a cousin or a brother who had moved there. And so they had kind of a built-in support network that they could rely upon once they landed in the United States. And so, they brought a lot of, community, church, and food traditions along with them.
Sure.
Although at the same time, they had a strong, will to assimilate and to become American, especially on my dad's side, where as soon as my grandfather was eligible to become a U.S. citizen, he naturalized.
Okay.
I was a little slower on my mom's side because it was actually my great-grandfather on my mom's side who immigrated, and he took his time before he naturalized. But so, I grew up next to my maternal grandparents. My dad's parents died younger, and so I only have vague memories of them. But my maternal grandparents were like a second set of parents to my brother and I, and they lived next door to us. So I was in and out of their kitchen constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And as I talk about in the book, there was always something bubbling away and delicious in that kitchen, especially around the holidays.
Sure.
And I was just kind of fascinated. I loved hanging out with my grandparents, and I was just always fascinated to try my hand at my grandmother coming from the Molise region. Cavatelli was a big pasta in her house, and I used to love to work with her, trying to imitate her deft hand at making that particular pasta shape. I think the other thing I remember distinctly as an early food memory related to that whole culture was now where I grew up, and I described the Wonder Years. As soon as my grandparents and my parents had the chance, they moved out to the suburbs. They left that Italian enclave, and this was part of the immigrant dream back then. Yeah. And they moved to the suburbs. But on the weekends, someone would get tasked, usually my dad, with traveling back into the Italian neighborhood to provision for the weekend. Sure. And I usually rode shotgun on those visits. And the first stop would be a bakery, which was actually owned by Greeks, and it still exists today, many, many years on. It's probably been in business for 75 or 80 years, I'm going to guess at this point, called the Columbus Bakery on North Pearl Street in Syracuse, New York. And you'd pull up to this place and the windows would be all fogged up with, condensation, and you'd step inside and immediately, even as a young child, I can still remember the smell of yeast and, fresh baked bread. And my dad would pick up several loaves, including an extra for the car, because he knew that my brother and I would tear into that. And then our next stop would be at what here in Italy we'd call an alimentari, which was basically an Italian delicatessen where you could buy cured meats and cheeses and olives and olive oil and all kinds of canned tomatoes and things of that nature. And that place had its own smell and feel to it as well. And that's probably, who knows, maybe subconsciously, that's where I picked up my love for provisioning, because I think a big part of cooking really is provisioning. I don't remember who the famous chef was, but I know there was a famous chef who once got a compliment from a customer who had just finished a beautiful meal, and she said, "Well, yeah, I think they said, you're such a wonderful chef." And she said, well, "What I really am is I'm a great shopper." And there's something to be said about that.
That's true, especially I think from an Italian culinary perspective, because it tends to be a simple and ingredient-driven cuisine. But you are clear in the book too that, and you mentioned your grandparents were eager to assimilate in some ways, but you are clear that many of these traditions endured, many of the culinary traditions, many of the practices endured despite, hardships of immigration, despite assimilating into new cultures. And you also are clear in the book about keeping Italian-American culinary recipes somewhat separate from the recipes that you're sharing that are more sort of traditional in this region.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I forget the direct quote in the book, but I do mention that even people from the U.S. who travel here for the first time that consider themselves 100% made in Italy. Sure. They're kind of surprised, and I'm not an exception. I think our first trip to Italy was in the mid-90s, my wife and I, and yeah, I thought I'd find chicken parm, but you find out that no, there is no chicken parm here in Italy. And you also find that there is no Italian cuisine per se, but there are regional cuisines throughout the peninsula. And it's part of what makes Italy such a interesting place to live in and to explore and to try to grasp a deeper understanding of it and its people.
Mm-hmm. So you had this relationship to food from an early age from your grandparents in particular, who were cooking foods that they knew. It wasn't a career path for you though. And did you initially start working in law, or what was sort of your you worked in law for some time.
I was for a long time. I've always been a creative person. I've always liked to write. I was very much involved in music. Tried for a while to pursue a career in music. But my better senses, again, going back to my roots, in our family, you were either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or a priest. Mm-hmm. And if you were none of those three, you might be considered a failure within the family. So, chef was not on the list, nor was really musician. But I think I was a creative imprisoned in the body of a businessman for many years. And so I went to business school. I went to law school after that. I practiced law briefly. And then I spent about 25 years plus in the commercial real estate business. My partners and I developed shopping centers in the northeast of the United States. I was very lucky at a relatively young age to then be able to take some time off, which is when we started traveling here in Italy. Sure. And I kept my hands in the business world for a period of time after that in some startup businesses in other industries. But no, cooking was not on the career path, but it was always something that I did at home. I started when I was in law school. I started cooking for myself, cooking for my roommates, cooking for friends, and I continued from that point forward. And for me as a businessman, many of the projects I was involved in had long gestation periods, let's say from idea to realizing them, years. And for me, cooking was always a very therapeutic thing because within a few hours, let's say you're making a braise and it's a 4-hour braise, it seems long for making a dish, but it's really not. There's this sense of satisfaction that, okay, I did that. And not only did I do that, but I made a bunch of people around me happy too at the same time. So it always was an outlet for me, even when I was working full bore.
And now you split your time. You live here part of the time. You at some point started a company where you offer intimate, bespoke tours of the Tuscan countryside. Was that sort of a gradual evolution for you then into this life you have now of, I think you describe yourself as an advocate and a teacher of Italian food, wine, and culture? Or was there a moment where it sort of shifted for you, an aha moment, if you will? Or how did you sort of evolve from that to now writing a book and leading these tours?
I can't say that there was one aha moment or that I consciously shifted gears or went onto a different path at any particular point in time. But as I was saying, I've always had a creative side to me, and I've always had this love of food and wine also. And, I'd say our first few years living here was, and I talk about this in the book, was more like an extended vacation. We spent an awful lot of time running around, traveling, seeing a lot of different things here in Tuscany, which was great, and visiting other parts of Italy as well. But I think, without a doubt, and this is part of what led to this book, 20 amici, 40 ricette, 20 friends and 40 recipes. It's our circle of friends here that's really kept us here. I think, without a sense of community, without a personal connection to any place, there's not really a good reason to be in any given place, right? So this had been in the back of my mind for a while, and I think during and right after COVID, especially, you talked about Aventura. Aventura trips, is something that my daughters and I dreamt up a few years ago, having seen firsthand some really disappointing tours that take place here, whether in the countryside or many more bad ones in the cities. We felt, wow, we could offer an insider's look at this place and bring people into authentic spots that no one else would think to go to or that others might not have access to. And why wouldn't we do that? And so we embarked on this Aventura Trips adventure, and then COVID hit, and it kind of got stuck in the mud. And then after COVID, we had all gone off in different directions, but it's something that we're bringing back to life now. And the book has kind of been an impetus for that.
Sure.
But I would say, it was also after COVID that I started thinking, okay, I've always had in the back of my mind to write. And I had kept a journal at one point when we were living in Italy many years ago on an experimental basis just outside of Florence. And I felt, well, I'm going to try to do this. I wasn't sure whether I would get the project completed. A lot of people talk about writing a book, but they don't necessarily always get it done. And I didn't know if I'd fall into that camp or whether I'd be a guy who got it over the goal line. But here we are today.
And the book is obviously many, many years in the making because it's built on these relationships that have been forming in this region for many years. Can you talk about how you decided to follow that theme and that format? Was that the vision from the beginning that it would be amici and ricette, or did that sort of evolve as you were thinking about writing a book into that format?
It did evolve. I think I have a lot to say about Italian regional cooking. I have a lot to say about Italian wine.
Sure.
I'm pretty opinionated, and I'm not a professional cook, but I am pretty good. And I'm good in the home. I'm good in the home kitchen, and I've spent a lot of time studying and learning, from others and learning on my own by trial and error. And so I think at the outset, to get back to your question directly, I felt, well, I can write a better cookbook, a better book about Tuscan cooking than has been done before. Just because I think I know how to communicate it better, and I can give, I must own hundreds of cookbooks, and, cookbooks are like shoes. Sometimes you buy a pair and you love them and you wear them out.
Yeah.
And other times you're like, why did I buy those shoes? And so I've got a few books like that too. And It's amazing how, some books get published and it's like boil water, put your pasta in, put the sauce on top, and enjoy your meal. And, somewhere between that and something that's too scientifically oriented, I thought that's a space I could land and be effective. But the more I thought about it, I realized that in the world we're in today, when you go onto Amazon and you look at what's out there, there's just such an ocean of books and material and information out there. And then not to mention the recipes and the techniques that are available to people to experiment with on Instagram or TikTok or other types of media. And I finally did admit to myself that though I thought I had something more to say, that this was a ground that had been covered hundreds and hundreds of times before, both the cooking piece and also the I moved to Italy and everything tastes better here kind of cliche. So I didn't want to do something that just followed that formula, and that was another cliche kind of driven book. And finally, thinking about it, I settled on, I said, maybe our friends is the answer, because everybody here does cook. They really do. It's true. And at least one or two dishes. Not everybody here is a prolific cook.
Sure.
Life has changed here in Italy, just like it has in many, many other places. But I'm always struck by when I'm out for a meal somewhere, whether it's an upscale place or it's a mom and pop a place here in Italy, what are people generally talking about if they're Italian? They're talking about the food that's in front of them, what they might have done different, what they could have done better, what they're going to have for their next meal. Yeah. It's that kind of thing. And the more I thought about it, I realized that it would be much more fun and engaging for the reader to meet some of our friends here and find out who they are, and how they fit into our life and what it is that they like to cook and how they've inspired me in the kitchen over the years.
Yeah, I think it's a really unique concept. And is it fair to say, I think that your audience is primarily American home cooks?
Yes. I think the target audience is people back in the States who either have their own love affair with Italy or want to have their own love affair with Italy, are interested in Italian cooking and food,
sure,
or are looking to escape through these images to a beautiful place for a little while from the comfort of their own family room. I will tell you, however, that the interest here in Italy in the book has really surprised me.
Wow.
And so who knows? Maybe an Italian translation at some point in time.
Yeah, that would be nice. I ask because I think some of your writing certainly feels intended to. As I was reading the book, I almost felt like you were in a tour guide mode in a sense. Like the comment you just made about boil pasta, put the sauce on top, and enjoy. Seems like it irked you because you had dedicated almost a mini chapter to the correct way to emulsify pasta and sauce together, and really guiding people there. Or another example is, you're quite frank about your dislike for Tuscan bread, which I think many American tourists have the same. You're American, you come to Italy, you come to Tuscany first, you try the bread, you find it quite lacking in some cases. So it felt like as you were writing the book that you sort of were talking as if you were a trusted guide, a trusted friend, helping someone navigate this part of Italy or just navigating Italian cuisine in general.
Yeah, I think that was part of my intention. I also think I see it from both sides. I've been here long enough. I speak the language fluently. I do have Italian citizenship. I have dual citizenship. I think I see it from both sides, as an American, but also as an Italian. So I think I offer an honest perspective. So I'm able to criticize Tuscan bread, and feel like I'm okay doing that. And I'm able to criticize the way pasta mostly gets made in United States restaurants, because I live here and I see the way it gets done right, and I see the way it gets done wrong in many, many places. There's also many places in the U.S. that do it the right way, sure, but they're harder to find and fewer and further between.
Yeah. Do you feel Italian? Because you just read this great excerpt from one of your friends, Sergio, about inviting him to dinner and making a matriciana, and it's still, you used the wrong cut of pork. So it's not the true, authentic matriciana. There's these sort of cultural exchanges that we see happen in the book, and even someone who's so rooted here, like you, do you still sort of have this feeling that you're navigating culture that isn't truly yours, and that there's a respect element and a tradition element that is always sort of present in Italian cuisine?
Well, I think there's probably two questions there. One is, how do I feel when I'm here? I was recently asked by someone else whether I felt like an expat when I was here, and my answer was no.
Yeah,
I don't. We don't feel like we're part of. We socialize with people who are part of the expat community here in Chianti as well as in Florence, but I don't feel like I'm an expat. Number one, because I don't live here full time, year round. But number two, because I do feel it. I do feel Italian. Again, I speak the language. I grew up around Italian culture, and I've come to become part of this community here in Gaioli over the years, as has my wife Cindy. So we're a little bit different. I think expats tend to puddle in within the expat community, which is understandable for personal support and networking, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's fine. I just wish, because many of them have been here a long time and they're perfectly capable of it, that they would venture outside of that bubble a little bit more, because that's really where the richest part of the experience comes in being in any other culture, whether it's here in Italy or if it's somewhere else. As far as the traditions and the rules that surround cooking here, yeah, it can be amusing sometimes, because the food police is very, very strong and very present here in Italy. So that story with my friend Sergio, he was fine with the dish. He loved the dish. He just said, you can't call it amatriciana, call it John's pasta or whatever it should be. I'm happy to eat it, but you can't call it that. So it's funny. I mean, tradition does play a big part in cooking here, and I think there are some dishes that you don't want to mess with those. You want to give them their due respect, and just simply try to replicate them in the most original way you can. But they are open to new and delicious things here as well. And there's a lot of young people that are experimenting with new flavors, new flavor combinations, but they're doing it with a respect for basic cooking tradition here. In other words, it's not 12 ingredients and it's not, you'll see phones and smoke in some Michelin-starred restaurants, but for the most part, that's not where they're trying to bring things.
Yeah. Well, and we see a bit of the 20 amici you chose. You know, we have Fernando, who's from Argentina. We have Sue, who's from Texas.
Yes.
But has lived here a long time. And you have a Texas chili recipe in the book from her. And talk a bit about the challenge that she faces in trying to find like tomatillos, for instance.
Exactly.
Here. So it is interesting that you included, you know, it's not just 20 Italians sharing their recipes, but it's really a portrait of a community in a sense, and that there are outside culinary influences. There's an openness that's on display, and then of course there's deeply ingrained tradition that's being celebrated too.
Yes.
Did anything surprise you as you were putting this book together and talking to these friends of yours, and also including some of your own recipes, some things from your wife? Anything surprise you as you were putting it together?
I think one thing that surprised me is, people here are private, right? They're not, they almost find like their life, well, who would be interested in what I have to cook? But, so I think they were surprised, and the fact that they were surprised that I wanted to include them in this project surprised me a little bit.
Yeah.
I also wondered how these would translate onto the page, these recipes, and, whether it would be embraced by home cooks that would feel, because I want people to cook from this book. I mean, I don't want people to just let it sit on their shelf and gather dust. And as we tested through some of the recipes, and it wasn't the normal rigorous, like, I didn't hire a recipe tester or anything like that. But as we cooked through the recipes to photograph them for the book, it became obvious to me, and I was pleasantly surprised that the recipes all did work.
Yeah.
There were some tweaks that I had to make here and there because I'm just sort of a touch and feel kind of a cook. I'm not, my kids will be texting me for advice. They're making dinner for friends sometime, and they'll go, well, how do I know when this is done? And I'm usually like, you'll know it's done when it's done, know, and I get the eye roll. Right. But I was pleasantly surprised that the recipes really did prove out the way I hoped they would.
Yeah, and it's a mix of people too, because you have some chefs, some restaurateurs, in addition to just friends and people who do incredible live fire cooking in their yard, and it is a really hodgepodge of culinary skill sets.
It is.
We've
got some Americans in there, a handful of Americans in there. We've got you mentioned Fernando, who's from Argentina, and we have a lot of people that are not native to Tuscany.
Right.
We do have my friend from Rome, Sergio. We have our dear friend Antonietta, who is originally from the Campania region down south. My good friend Riccardo from the Continente del Chianti, who is from Basilicata, which most people know the city of Matera.
Mm-hmm.
It's the region that includes Matera. And so it's an interesting mix of people that have transplanted here, not just from other countries, but also from other parts of Italy.
Yeah. Did you think at all about ingredients and the ability to procure ingredients coming from an American audience perspective? I think one of the things that I've really loved living in Italy is the seasonality and some of the simple ingredients that are treated with such reverence when they're in season. I know you have a recipe for fava beans, fresh fava beans with pecorino. There's also a recipe for fiore di zucca, this is zucchini blossom flowers that are everywhere here when they're in season, but from my experience at least, are not very accessible in the States. So was that part of your thinking as you were putting it together, to highlight some of these ingredients that play such a key role in the cuisine here, but aren't, a part of regular American diets, I would venture to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I think regional Italian cooking is completely it's completely ingredient driven. Yeah. There's no question about it. And it's part of what makes living here so enjoyable is the ready availability of some just amazing ingredients, even in a small town like where we live. Obviously, if you go to the cities and I understand that you now live in Bologna, so you know what I'm talking about. I mean, Bologna has one of the most amazing food shopping districts in any Italian city that I've traveled to during our 20 years here. But even in the small hillside communities here, it's just a completely different tradition of how you shop for your food. You know, it's done every day or every other day. You know, we have an artisanal butcher in our town.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a greengrocer who just dedicates himself to fruits and vegetables still. And so it is a very different experience here. I wanted to write a cookbook that people could cook from back in the States and where they could access the ingredients. And I think for the most part, 95% of these ingredients are pretty readily available back in the States, especially today. I think, I mentioned some sources here in the book. This whole, again, back to my friend Sergio, this whole story about guanciale versus pancetta. You can find guanciale today in the U.S., whereas maybe even 10 years ago, not so much.
Yeah.
But you can find it. You can find better quality pastas and olive oils today from sources like Italy, from Bustiamo in Brooklyn, from Steve Jenkins, who was one of the early importers of European cheeses. He worked for Dean and DeLuca and then was part of Fairway in New York. And now is on his own with a venture called Olive Oil Jones. And I highly recommend them because they search out some of the best olive oils, not just from Italy, but from Spain, from Greece, and other places. And they ship it to the U.S. They're New York based. They ship it in large containers, and then they individually bottle and ship to people throughout the U.S. And it's really high quality oil at a very fair price. And good olive oil is something that's really difficult to find back in the States. You'll see it at Whole Foods, but it might be 2 or 3 years old on their shelves.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the rural Midwest, and even when I'm back home last summer, I mean, I saw guanciale. The accessibility it's just not what it once was. So
no, it's much better today. You just got to look a little bit harder.
Yeah. We always like to ask about your relationship to cookbooks. You mentioned earlier that you own probably hundreds of cookbooks, like many authors on our show. Do you have particular books or authors that were meaningful to you as you learned to cook, or as you wrote your first book that you looked to for inspiration?
I think it's evolved over the years.
Mm-hmm.
2 cookbooks that affected me very, very early on when I started cooking as a young adult and as a young parent, and as Cindy and I started entertaining more at home. I would say Jacques Pepin, an incredible influence on me. I remember watching his show and being mesmerized by his kitchen skills. And, his book, La Technique, is very technical and maybe not for everybody, but it certainly was a groundbreaking book at its time. And of course, he authored several others that were much more approachable. And, I think, it's boring to talk about, who wants to talk about knife skills and how to butcher a chicken and all these things, but it makes cooking so much more enjoyable when you master just a few simple kitchen skills like that. So that was definitely an influence. There was a chef who just recently passed away, and in the last year or two, Jasper White, who was a legendary culinary figure in the Boston area, and had a restaurant that had a long run in Boston called Jasper's, which was fabulous. And he did a cookbook, and I'm gonna botch the name of it, but it was like Jasper White's New England cuisine or something. And that was a book that I still have. That book's got a lot of stains on it, because again, he gave a lot of great information on cooking techniques and how to source ingredients. And it was also an interesting mishmash of ethnic influences because many Portuguese immigrants in the New England area, especially in New Bedford, Fall River, just outside of Boston, and Jasper, had a way with those flavors, especially with some of his seafood dishes. So I loved his book. And then later, with Italian cooking, certainly, I mean, the essentials of classic cooking, Marcello Hazan.
Sure.
It's encyclopedic.
Yeah.
I don't agree with Marcella on everything. I don't like butter in my tomato sauce.
Oh, really? Because everyone else loves
everybody loves that. Maybe it depends what part of Italy you're in, but everybody does love that sauce. But she was a force for sure. Very opinionated. A great resource.
Well, John, we always end with a little game, so I thought we would play an ingredient-based game today, sort of a wild Tuscan ingredient challenge with you, and give you a sort of a chopped TV-style box of ingredients that you can work with and see if you can draw some inspiration from your amici, your friends who you featured in the book, and your own kitchen to tell us what you might make with these ingredients. How does that sound?
Awesome. Let's do it.
Perfect. Okay, so let's look at our first box. So the first box of ingredients we have fresh fava beans, some guanciale, and a little nice bundle of fresh mint. How might we work with those ingredients?
Well, that's almost a direct recipe right from the book. There's a recipe in the book for a great Tuscan salad that's made with fresh pecorino cheese and fava beans. But I think, maybe especially with the addition of some mint, I might do a pasta dish with that. I'd probably use a long pasta like a spaghetti or a linguine, and I would just do kind of I'd probably in a pan, I'd make almost like an aglio olio type sauce, a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of garlic, some pasta cooking water, and then I'd add those fava beans. I'd probably render that guanciale down as part of making that initial part of the sauce. And then once that cooked down a little bit, I would add those fresh fava beans in there. They really don't need much when they're that fresh. They don't really need to cook much. And then I just amalgamate all of that with a little bit of fresh pecorino cheese at the end. I think you'd have a really delicious primo.
I think that sounds excellent, and I love that you didn't just go with the salad recipe, because I think it's so easy just to take the fresh fava and the pecorino because they're so delicious, but that you took it to a new level for us.
Yeah.
Let's try another one. Let's throw a little bit of a more interesting ingredient, more unexpected ingredient in the mix. Okay, so let's say now you've got a really nice Florentine steak. You've got some fresh rosemary, a nice bottle of some wine from Chianti. Okay, easy. But we're going to throw a wild card in there. You've also got popcorn kernels.
Popcorn kernels. That is a wild card. I'm going to say I'd probably get a mortar and pestle and maybe grind those down into something that's going to provide a little bit of crunch, almost as much as close to a powder, maybe as I could get it to come, and then maybe even as opposed to the traditional prep. I think I definitely would grill that steak, being here in Chianti for sure. And usually the traditional preparation would be to grill it kind of hard. I mean, I don't know, Tuscans like their meat pretty raw here. Me, not so much. So I'm more of a medium rare guy, but traditionally you'd grill that, you'd kind of anoint it at the end with some great olive oil, a little bit of lemon juice, and that essence of rosemary. But I think maybe I would throw into that the mortar pestle situation with the popcorn kernels, some of that rosemary, some salt and pepper, and either create almost like a rub from that that could be put on the steak beforehand, or you can even just kind of put that on right at the end as almost like a powder, because I find sometimes with rubs like that, especially on a grill, they'll tend to burn and maybe become a little bit bitter. But yeah, I'd try for something like that and see. And I think actually the crunch of that popcorn could be a nice contrast with the steak. So
I think that's really interesting. I love that you ground those down at the mortar and pestle. Okay, let's do one more. Final basket here. So we've got some stale Tuscan bread, leftover bread you need to use up, some really beautiful San Marzano tomatoes, and a nice shot of grappa that you don't want to drink. You got to throw it in the dish somehow. So, what do we do with it?
Honestly, alcohol is like an interesting ingredient in many ways. I mean, I talk a little bit in the book in the Italian American section about vodka sauce and how, as a kid, I was
Mhm.
always like, ooh, can I order that? I'm only 12 years old. Is it really good? Most of the time, there's no vodka in a vodka sauce, but vodka does because all alcoholic beverages evaporate so quickly. It is used sometimes in sauces to create a certain consistency with the sauce. So I think I'd make a little marinara sauce with some garlic. I'd add a little bit of I'd put that grappa in there. I'd make sure the alcohol all cooked off. So maybe I just had the essence of that great must that the grappa is distilled from. I wouldn't cook it too long, and then I'd take that stale bread. I'd wet it. I'd get it wet. I'd squeeze it out. I'd put it in a
Yep.
little pie tin. I would put that tomato sauce on top of it. I'd add a little bit of, if you got it around, some mozzarella cheese, maybe some oregano. And I would bake that in the oven at about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, like, 200 centigrade, until that cheese starts to melt and I get a little crust on top. And you would be shocked at how close that's going to come to tasting like a pizza when it comes out of the oven. It's
Wow.
a technique I saw from I don't know if you're familiar with the chef Pepe Guido here in Italy. In
Yeah.
fact, he was just profiled on the chef's table for the
Uh-huh.
pasta series, and that's a recipe that I picked up from him at a show here in Italy. Interesting guy, a great cook, and that's a super dish.
Wow, I love it. I'm gonna have to try that. I haven't tried that before, so thank you for that suggestion. Well, we didn't stump you, but I think those are three excellent answers to these ingredient combinations. So thanks for playing the game, John, and thank you so much for hosting us and for joining us on Salt and Spine. It was a real blast chatting with you.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it as well.
And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening. A big thanks again to John Bersani and his family for hosting me at their home in Gaiole and Chianti for this great conversation. As always, you can find recipes from today's conversation at saltandspine.com, as well as conversations with more than 200 of your favorite cookbook authors. Our show today was produced by me, Brian Hogan Stewart, and our original theme song is created by Brunch for Lunch. Thanks, as always, to our many supporters, including Jen Nurse and Chris Bonomo at the Civic Kitchen and to Celia Sack at Omnivore Books. We'll be back next week with more stories behind the cookbooks you love.